People say you spend over $2 million a year on your health.
Bryan Johnson.
He calls himself the world's most measured human.
One of your most notable successes was selling Braintree Venmo for $800 million to PayPal.
$800 million.
We've built an algorithm that takes better care of me than I can myself. I'm the most measured person in human history. I'm hundreds of different ages. Like my diaphragm is 18, my left ear is 64. With all this data, we take the data, we look at scientific evidence, we say, what does the evidence say is the best thing for my body to do? We then design a clinical grade protocol, and then my job is to follow it with absolute perfection. No questions asked.
From your perspective, what's that like the day 9 figures clears in your bank account?
I was depressed out of my mind, getting a divorce, leaving my born-into religion, trying to overcome a decade of depression. I was just wrecked as a human. I was so numb, I couldn't feel it.
Hey guys, welcome to the special episode of the Passionate Few podcast today. It's your host, Omar, and today we have an incredible interview as we sit down with none other than Bryan Johnson. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Bryan.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So let's get into it. A lot of people have seen you on social media recently. You just did a bunch of interviews around the world. People say you spend over $2 million a year on your health. One of your most notable successes was selling Braintree Venmo for $800 million to PayPal. So you've done all this epic stuff, but take us back. Where did this all begin for you? Where did the young Bryan first grow up, and what was his childhood like before we got into business or any of that? Take us way back.
It was rural Utah, outside playing all the time, building forts, setting traps, going out with my dog in the morning at 5 a.m. My grandpa had a farm. We grew alfalfa, and I kind of was a farm boy.
And at the time, I know that you said that you had a bunch of odd jobs. You had applied for different jobs and didn't get them, and then later would kind of stumble into payment processing. Take us through some of the early jobs before you got into payment processing, and which would later lead to the whole Braintree Venmo thing. Yeah,
my first job, I guess meaningful job, was I bought a cell phone in 1997, and I met somebody at the mall that I found through the Yellow Pages. And he said, you seem like you're smart and energetic. Why don't you sell phones for me? And he offered me $40 per activation. I thought, great. I can do this and make $40 an hour because I need to make money for school.
How old were you at the time?
21. And because I needed to make money and pay my way through school, but an hourly job would never cut it. I just looked at the numbers and I thought, I need to find a way to somehow leverage my time. And so I sold phones for him for 2 days. And I thought, wait a second. If I'm selling phones for him, why can't I build out an infrastructure and have other cell phones for me? And so I ran home and I created a business within 2 days. I built out the infrastructure of becoming a wholesaler, buying the phones, and then setting up the services, and I built out a group of salespeople. And it just kind of ran on autopilot, and it paid my way through college. And it was my first time that I understood this, how to build a system of value creation. And it was a really eye-opening experience of how you assess a given landscape, the players that are involved, the systems that are there, and then how you try to engage in a productive way.
And where did that start for you? Like, where would that foundation coming from Utah come from? Because I know I was reading up on you, and I know that you read over 100 biographies, and you were always fascinated by a lot of autobiographies of people who've done awesome stuff. So where did that sort of inspiration or that desire for you to build out and a scaled system come from? There was no YouTube, there were no business books. So where did that desire come from? Because that wasn't common for most 21-year-olds, I imagine, from Utah.
You're right. I guess I feel deeply connected with these people of history. When I read their accounts, what they did in their time and place resonates deeply with me. And I value that we still speak about these people and the things they did. And I also appreciate the hardship they endured to accomplish those things. And so my mind has always been oriented in this way, where I imagine people getting together in the 25th century and discussing what happened in the early 21st century. And over that time period, everything gets compressed. So when we talk about the 16th century, we have a pretty small number of things that we've chronicled and remember and talk about relative to the number of things that happened. And so it forces this natural process to say what really matters right now. And if you pose that question and then you run the filter through today, for example, I would wager that 99.9% of everything that happens today won't matter in 100 years from now. And so it's trying to identify that one little bit of thing that's going to matter that carries forward in time.
That's profound, because I know you said growing up you came from humble beginnings to where your family would decide, with the $5 weekly budget, if you guys would go through like the car wash and eat. Like, talk to me a little bit about your humble beginnings, right? Because you didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial household per se, right?
That's right. Yeah, my mom would make my clothes for me, and I thought it was really cool. I didn't really, it didn't dawn on me that we didn't have money or didn't have things. I felt like I had everything that we needed. And I had a wonderful childhood. My siblings were my best friends. The neighborhood I grew up in, it was fantastic. We'd walk into each other's homes. It was such a, it was such a beautiful environment of friendship and closeness. And I really miss it, to be honest. It's, I mean, it's, we live in a pretty rigorous world of busyness and competitiveness. And I really miss the closeness of community that I had when I was a kid.
And it's interesting too, because I know early on you came up with this vision for your life where you devised a plan of, I would need to make X amount of money by X age. So it seemed like you were always sort of thinking bigger. Take me back to when you reverse engineered that plan for your life, right? I believe you had like certain numbers in mind. By the time I'm 20 something, by the time I'm 30. Can you walk the audience through a little bit of that psychology at that time and how you designed your life and a lot of it came true? Yeah,
I mean, it was really a result of I wasn't good at anything, and so the
I think we all can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, I was a farm boy in Utah. School was a real challenge for me. My brain just didn't match school. To sit into class and listen to a teacher, it was hard for me to understand the information. Then every time I took a standardized test, I scored like an idiot. I mean, almost like I would score better every time if I just answered B on every question. And so it was confusing for me because in certain parts of my life I could say, okay, I'm of a reasonable level of intelligence, and I would take these tests and they'd be like, no, you're an idiot. And I couldn't quite reconcile why my brain didn't function well in these different areas. And so having not exceeded in school and having been on a farm boy, then not actually met an engineer until my early 20s, I didn't really have any exposure to like what kind of skills to build, what kind of person to become. So when I was 21 years old, and doing a self-assessment, I was like, well, I really don't have anything that's notable, that any skill set. And so I thought, I'll resort to the basics of resourcefulness and tenaciousness of what can you do with those kinds of things.
And then you designed a plan for your life that, was it one day or was it iterative that you decided, hey, by 30 I need X amount, or, to talk to me about that, because I think there's a lot of people who have, great plans for their life, but they actually never sit down, nail the numbers and decide. Can you take me back to maybe that day or that era in your life where you sat down and wrote out the plan? And what was the plan? What were those numbers that you wrote out for yourself?
It was $7 million when I was 21 years old. And I did $7 million because I think I calculated an interest rate of something like 6% or 7% per year that I could get on the money. And I assumed that $7 million would get me freedom of mind. So basically I would have enough money to pay my basic bills in life, not an extravagant lifestyle, just something basic, and they would survive throughout a lifetime, and that at that point I could use my mind in any way I could imagine. I was trying to basically buy freedom of time.
Yeah. And was that born out of a desire to, I don't know, a lot of people we've interviewed who've gone on to build big things, it was born out of honestly sometimes like the girl didn't like them, or maybe mom and dad struggled and seeing them struggle. Where did the fire in you come from? Or was it just a desire for, just to prove to yourself, like what was the core burning desire that allowed it to kind of flourish in you?
It was these biographies. That we all live on this continuum. We benefit so greatly from everyone who's come before us. And I appreciate them a lot. And they're no longer here, that's sad. But we are living a magnificent society. And oftentimes it's easy for us to forget how phenomenal things are. We can just turn on the tap and clean water shows up. Energy just runs in our household through the walls. I mean, it's
roads
actually
are paved for us in advance.
It's unbelievable. We have rule of law. We can walk outside and we can be safe. I mean, it's just unreal what we have today. And it made sense to me that I would pose the same question and say, what is the value I could offer the human race today and that would carry on hundreds of years? It was the only model of living that made sense to me.
And you carried that psychology into starting what would become Braintree. But walk me through the payment processor landscape. How did you go from some of your early entrepreneurial endeavors and failures to then getting into the payment processor space? Like, walk me through what that was like.
It was a mistake. So I definitely didn't.
Paid off though, huh?
It wasn't a case that I mapped out all the industries that I could go into. It was that I was desperate for a job. I had debt up to my eyeballs. I had a little baby.
How much debt?
Oh goodness, I think it was something like, I'm going to guess, probably $20,000.
Yeah, and you're in your mid-20s, early 20s.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, I have basically no income. It's all credit card debt. I'm working on several business endeavors. I've got a baby at home, mom staying at home with the baby. I'm the breadwinner, so I needed to find some source of income, and no one would hire me. I had no way to make money, and so then I found this job to sell credit card processing door to door. 100% commission, so it was entirely a risk that I would take. It's a pretty unpleasant thing to do, to walk up and down the street, going in and out of businesses, but it was the only option I had. And so I took
it was door to door, just cold going into businesses, offering payment processors.
Yep.
And I know you started doing really well in that, right? Within a couple months, you were like number one in that. What was your strategy to excel in that pretty quickly?
It goes back to that same idea of just looking at the system and saying, like, pulling yourself back and understanding what games are being played, who the players are, what they're doing, and why they're doing it. And the gist of it at that time was that the industry really relied upon deception for success.
The payment processor industry.
Exactly. And so it was very much that what I would tell you would not be the case. I would induce you to do something by misrepresenting the truth. And the business owners got smart to that. After a couple times of going through the process, they'd be like, I know your game. And so in that case, the system is dishonesty. And the solution is honesty. So I'd go in and basically just say, here's what's happening behind the scenes and what you're seeing, and here's how you're being duped. And I offer nothing. What I'm offering you is no different than anyone else. Like, everyone has an undifferentiated product, and they all try to spin it like it is. It's not. It's the exact same. It's just true commodity. So the only thing you can buy is honesty, great customer service, and just to be out of sight, out of mind. And people bought that.
And you would walk in, I believe I heard a story, with a $100 bill sometimes, right? What was your pitch to them with the $100 bill?
You had to, in this situation, the moment they knew I was they knew I was a salesperson, and then when they realized that I was doing credit card sales, it was like a double whammy. And so they hated people like me. And so their instinct was to tell me to get lost. And so I had to punch through somehow to say, just give me 30 seconds of your time, 1 minute of your time, to allow me to break through. And so again, it's just a system analysis of what's really going on. And because ultimately they benefited from working with me. I solved a very serious problem they had. They didn't want to have dishonest providers. They didn't want to be taken advantage of. They wanted reliability. And so if I could just tell them, I'm really here to solve the core problems, you can run your business, but you needed to get over that hump.
And so you would literally tell them that, take a $100 bill and tell them?
Yeah, I'd say, I think my pitch was something like, give me 3 minutes of your time, and if it's not worth it to you, you can have the $100 bill. Like, you're calling. It's up for your taking if I wasted your time for 3 minutes.
Yeah, and then you do that for a couple months, and then you start developing some competency, you get good at it, you start seeing the residuals in it. Where is it where you make the shift and go, maybe there's a business opportunity here that I could take into my own hands? Like, walk me through that.
I mean, I had one eye on this payment processing and the one eye on this other endeavors I was doing. At the end of 11 months or so, the residual revenue from my customers was $62,000 a month, is what I was earning in fees.
For the business that you represented, or that was your commission?
That was for the company I was selling for. And then I received something like 10% of that.
Residually?
Exactly. So my residual income was $6,000 a month. But I thought, if I had built this as a business and I had captured this $62,000 a month, I would basically have solved my $7 million plan. Right? Within a couple of years, like, you get that baseline and then it just runs.
Scale it.
Yeah, exactly. But it was the first hint of these residual systems of building value, and that I had done it mistakenly. Like, not even looking at that thing as the objective, just as trying to solve an immediate problem. It solved this other objective I had.
That's really interesting, because you probably had like this big intent, correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably had this big intent to do big things and all these other different endeavors, and then the thing that actually ends up being the big hit was just you actually solving a problem instead of you trying to force your way to make money into it per se. What did you learn from that, and what advice could you give from people watching this who are maybe trying to find their own gold mine and trying a bunch of stuff versus actually solving an existing issue within a system? Does that make sense?
Ooh, yeah.
That's a big question.
What a good question. What a big question.
maybe a simpler way to put it would be, what would you tell that young Bryan who is trying to maybe force ideas to work versus actually getting in the trenches and solving an issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few. Okay, so if I'm speaking to younger Bryan, I'd say there's a few tricks on how to think about the world that are going to help you eliminate bad ideas and filter through to get some of the better ones. What are going to be the best ones are harder to get, but at least you can sort the better ones. So one is understanding systems like we were talking about, with the cell phones being one, the payments being other. I think I was right in those, like what is happening here, who the players are, what are their incentives, what are they trying to do? So when you go into a given industry, you can sort it to say, what am I really playing with? It's easy to take a microscope and say, like this very granular problem. It's much more helpful to look at it in a much broader context to say, where could this go? And then two is, like, what is your ability to practically solve every problem in the chain? So if you broaden it out to say, think about how this solves and how it scales. How many problems can you solve yourself, and how many problems do you need others to help you solve? And then assess, can you acquire those skill sets to solve all the problems you need to solve? Like, so that's, for example, like Kernel. Kernel was an incredibly complicated endeavor that took world experts from a dozen different fields to come together.
Which is a company you later founded, the neurotech company.
So I mean, I guess every time I've scaled up a little bit more complexity. This is such a good question. I suspect there's probably a really good answer I could come up with. On the spot, it's very hard, and I hesitate to say too much that would be misguided.
Hey guys, we'll get right back to this video in a sec, but first, I have a quick question for you. Given that the e-commerce industry is growing by the trillions year over year, have you ever dreamed of running your own e-commerce business like many of the guests we've interviewed on the show? But maybe you felt overwhelmed about where to begin? Lucky for you, today's sponsor, Zendrop, solves this exact problem. You see, with Zendrop, you simply select high-quality products, add them to your store, and they handle shipping and fulfillment while you make the profit. No more guessing games on product sourcing or dealing with inventory hassles. Zendrop's platform is designed with you in mind, making it incredibly simple to launch and scale your dropshipping business in a one-stop shop. Plus, they're offering an exclusive deal. Sign up today through our link below, and their team will personally craft your very own store to kickstart your e-commerce journey. They even have weekly coaching calls to answer all of your questions and help you get up and running in no time. It's truly more than just a platform. It's your e-commerce partner waiting to join you on the path to success. So why wait? It only takes 5 minutes or less to sign up. Simply hit pause, head over to zendrop.com/passion, and let's turn your passion for e-commerce into a thriving online business today. Thank you to Zendrop for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, the reason I ask is because, there's so many people who are trying to force things to work. And what I'm really fascinated by, and I think most people are fascinated by, is the fact that you took that success from the payment processor, and then with no real experience per se, other than that sales rep experience, you bootstrapped, for lack of a better word, you bootstrapped actually building the business. So like, there was clearly something in there where you thought, you felt like, this is worth it, right? This is going to lead to something. So take me back to, how did you bootstrap it from once you started seeing that residuals?
Yeah. Having sold credit card payments, retail, door to door, we found several companies that had online sales. And when they did that, we would try to sell a solution. And they oftentimes complained about the difficulty of the technology solutions not being good enough. And PayPal was the primary payment system at the time. But they had been bought by eBay, and they had lagged in their development. They basically had frozen their product for 7 years. So software tools had moved forward, and that product had stayed the same. And people were complaining it was antiquated and not great to work with. So it was very obvious to me a wonderful opportunity in building better software for engineers to build for these companies. And then I knew the payment side. And so the only problem I had to solve for was a software team that could build out the infrastructure to do this. And so that was the first thing, is could I build a solution to get me in market? And then the second piece I knew I had to get was PayPal was the company making the most money, because they had services to merchants and they had services to consumers. And so it was, can you get a wallet, and then can you get a payment system for merchants, like get a two-sided marketplace? And so my plan was start with the payment system for companies and then buy the consumer side down the road, because a lot of companies had failed trying to do both at once. PayPal got lucky because they did the integration with eBay, so they walked into an existing ecosystem to help people move money back and forth. But just building it from scratch with no help is very hard. And in the building of Braintree, we started building a payment system, and I struck a deal with OpenTable. They had an issue where people would reserve on their application, and they would have a higher show-up rate if they had their credit card in the system.
For like a restaurant or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they didn't want the compliance burden of the credit cards. And so they said, if you can build a system within our system, so credit cards come through, you store it on your system so we don't have to do the compliance stuff, would help us. So they paid us $3 million over 3 years. Monthly is $30,000 a month, roughly, for 3 years, and which gave me enough money to basically hire the engineering team to build out the application.
And at that time, was that the biggest deal of your life?
Yes.
That deal, were you like excited out of your mind?
Yeah, and nervous we could deliver.
Yeah.
I definitely promised more than I knew I could deliver. I mean,
and you had no experience as a software developer, right? So you funded the whole thing, like just got software developers together and just bootstrapped it?
Yeah, so what I did is when I switched from selling credit card processing services, I went back to my 10 or 20 best customers and got them to switch over to my new company. And that gave me a baseline of revenue,
Smart, yeah.
which then I could then fund the early software developers. So we had some tools to work with. And then once I closed that deal, we hired a few more. But yeah, that's how we started, is we built that from scratch, and that became our core payment system.
Yeah, and then you started servicing Uber, right? Which has helped them with their services of like seamless transactions where people get inside the Uber, they don't have to sign a receipt, bill, or anything like that.
Yeah.
Did you cold call, or once you sort of got one business, it was easy to kind of get leverage for another and another? Was that kind of your client acquisition system?
I needed to. The problem I was trying to solve is how can I get customers in e-commerce or just like generally developer space without spending money, because I didn't really have any money. I was bootstrapping. And so what I did is I looked up some papers on what are the social network profiles of various coding languages. So for example, like how do .NET developers cluster socially versus Ruby on Rails versus Python versus someone else. And I found that Ruby on Rails developers were the most closely clustered community, which means their nodes are more connected. So if one person does something, adopts a certain tool, the others are highly likely to adopt it as well, where other communities were more dispersed. And so I went out and I found the most influential people in the Ruby on Rails community, which at the time was 37 Signals, now Basecamp, and then Shopify. They were also very influential, and they became customers. And then they started telling all their friends about us, and we spread and got the entire Ruby on Rails community. Then we jumped to Python and a few others. And so it was basically just working through trust networks of developers. And because we worked so hard to build a fantastic product and work on delivering exceptional service, we tried to get them to refer us at this high rate, and it worked. In fact, I grew the company without spending any money on marketing.
And give us context of revenue those first couple years, and then ultimately why you ended up acquiring Venmo relatively, at a low rate compared to what you ended up exiting as a whole. But what was revenue like those first? If you could walk us through maybe the first 1 to 3 years.
We were doubling every year. It was, I think, 2, then 4, then 8. But we were on that path because also our revenue was riding Airbnb and Uber and GitHub.
So as they grew, you kind of grew with them.
And their growth curves were just starting to hit. And so you could see very clearly where we were heading. So even though our revenue numbers were relatively modest, I think we hit about 10 million or so in year 3, something like that.
Yeah.
But our growth curve was incredibly fast.
Was part of you thinking, holy shit, how's this idea actually working? Because I know there's this big thing, we've interviewed a lot of, billion-dollar entrepreneurs that built 1 and 2, and I sat down with John Paul DeJoria from Patron Tequila and Paul Mitchell, and I said, do you ever look around and think, holy cow, how'd this happen? He goes, dude, all the time. He goes, we all marvel at it, but it's like you just start incompetent, and little, by being in the trenches, you gain competency, and that compounds. Walk me through what ultimately led to you guys acquiring Venmo and what your rationale was at that time, and ultimately, how that ended up, how that acquisition actually ended up.
The economics of credit card processing is if you're a business and you process credit card payments through me, if you're doing large volumes, I may make 10 cents a transaction or 30 cents a transaction, but it's relatively small. If instead of using a credit card, if you're accepting my payment method, like a PayPal account or a Venmo account, my margins triple, quadruple, 10x. And so the money in payments is in the fees that are generated when payments are done. Otherwise, they're going to the banks, Visa, MasterCard.
Yeah, that 2.9% or whatever it is,
The majority is going to the credit card issuer. And so PayPal was the payments company making the most money out of anybody. And I knew that from the very beginning. I just knew that we couldn't build out of the gate the merchant side and consumer side, because you'd kill the company trying to do both at the same time.
Very smart distinction, yeah.
Yeah, so you need to choose your focus and then build it. And so at the time, we were 5 years in, and we had some of the best merchants in the whole world, like Shopify, Uber, Airbnb, GitHub, the highest growth companies in the world.
Yeah.
And we had, on the flip side, Venmo was the same payment service they were using to move money between themselves. But Venmo hadn't figured out a business model yet. It was it was a cool thing they'd figured out, making payment social. And so we acquired them for $26.2 million. And it was the puzzle fit I had tried to map out in the first day of Braintree of how do you build this two-sided marketplace. And with Venmo, it was check, exactly.
Acquired them.
So now cost of payment goes to zero. So now Venmo can be a form of payment merchants accept. And so now if we're charging 2.9% and 30 cents, our cost is almost zero, you know, if it's coming from a Venmo payment source.
Yeah. So when you acquired them, was your plan to potentially build it to exit? Like was part of your rationale, like I want to build this to a certain size, then I could exit? Like was that part of your thing, or were you kind of just building it and like, let me figure it out later as the CEO, as the guy running the show? What was your rationale at that time?
Yeah. Always build as if it's in perpetuity. If you build towards exit, you're going to build a flimsy thing. Build as if it has to withstand the test of time in perpetuity. And we did a fantastic job. The company culture with our team members, with our customers. I only had 3 goals for the company. One is that our customers would write us love letters.
I love that.
2, that our teammates would say is the best job they'd ever had. And 3, that we'd be the best in the industry. And so the love letter thing was really the thing that got us going. Is we would share these letters we got where people would be like, you're unreal. Like, you guys find out I have problems and address the problem before I can even let you know I have a problem. So we worked extraordinarily hard, so people would just love interfacing with us. And it was deep in our culture, but that's the kind of thing where you want to build institutional sturdiness to say, we are here, we're going to be here for a long time. You know, and Braintree persists. I mean, it's an independent brand from PayPal, even though it got acquired. It's one of the biggest payment providers in the whole world. It's basically a critical part of the global commerce system. I'm incredibly proud of that, and that's because we built the company with that intent, that we are going to do something meaningful and emulation worthy.
Dude, that's amazing. And then the day PayPal called, what was that like? Were you getting multiple offers from different entities, or did they try for a long time to acquire? Like, how did that go when you got the phone call and they wanted to acquire you guys?
Yeah, we got they just sent over an offer to buy us.
Just straight up?
Sight unseen, with cash deal.
And it was a 9-figure deal?
Yeah, it was, yep.
Yeah.
And 10. And they were smart. I mean, they saw the writing on the wall. We were beating them on the merchant side. We had acquired Venmo. We were kind of eating their lunch everywhere.
Yeah.
So it was a smart move on their side.
Yeah.
And then for me, it was, I loved Braintree more than anything, and I poured my heart and soul into the company.
Yeah.
My mind was always in, the 25th century contemplation.
Yeah.
And payments are important. They run the world. It's probably also not going to be relevant to the future of humanity in the 25th century. And so it was useful in terms of business building expertise and acquiring capital, but not on point for what I felt like my existence was about.
And then the last question I have on this before we transition to what you're most passionate about now with health and Blueprint is, the day that the transaction clears, does that money just get wired in your bank account, change your life? Walk me through the day the money hits your account and life changes.
Yeah.
Was that pretty surreal? Because very few human beings on this planet will ever experience that. So from your perspective, what's that like the day 9 figures clears in your bank account?
A bit surreal in that I was depressed out of my mind. I was trying to reconcile, like getting a divorce. I was leaving my born-into religion, trying to overcome a decade of depression. I was just wrecked as a human. And so as much as I'd like to say it was a surreal experience and we were doing all these good things, I was so numb to existence, I couldn't feel it.
Wow, and I appreciate the honesty in that. But was that the moment where you said something needs to change, or did that, point of depression last a lot longer and then kind of, you go through it? Because it's hard, right? It's hard to be dealing with, depression when you quote unquote have everything that you think you wanted or worked all this time to get, and the things that are most important are not there, right? Success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure, as they say. So walk me through what that transition was like and what you ended up doing to get out of that depression, out of that funk. What was the catalyst?
I mean, it wasn't, basically, these were inevitable things I needed to reconcile for a long time. So I was born into a religion, and for those who aren't born into religion, it's very hard to explain how much that reality takes hold of your reality. Like it was, growing up in Utah, it was the only reality that existed, and it was like the good people and the rest of the people, in group, out group. And it was such a fine line of they're not trustworthy, and your only objective is to persuade them this is right. And so it was this process where I'd been trying to work my way out of that for my entire life. But when you're in it with a spouse and kids and family and network, like
The weight of it is heavy,
my entire existence, then the existential contemplation of is this true, not true, then you don't have total control of your brain. You have a rational brain, an emotional brain. It's just, it's so hard to, it's hard to convey the difficulty of that situation. And then because I think of that plus a bunch of other factors, I was depressed, like not getting good sleep with babies, working my tail end off for Braintree Venmo, like all the things that happen when you're doing this kind of thing.
And how old were you at this time?
Late 20s.
Okay.
And then, I mean, just like, it all just compounded upon itself. You know, and then we all know what it's like to have a bad relationship. You know, like we were both, my partner and I were trying to work through things, but nothing's worse than a contentious relationship. And so everything was just kind of hitting on that level. And so, but you know, when you're building a company and when you're raising kids and you're working through all the stuff, it's very hard to make big decisions. It's all so intertangled. And so yeah, I knew it was coming to a head at some point, but it just never was the right time. And then after the acquisition, it was the right time.
What's up, Rockstar? Listen, we'll get back to the video in a sec. First, quick question. Are you an entrepreneur making $20,000 per month in take-home profit or more, but feel stuck growing your brand or business? Well, if so, you're not alone. The reality is that growing your business can be incredibly challenging, especially without the right support, experience, strategy, and accountability in place to help you get there. So if that sounds true for you and you've been looking for some help, I have some exciting news. The Passionate Few has officially opened our one-on-one consulting programs to help people who are serious about taking their life and business to the next level this year actually do it. But this is only by application, and it's on a first come, first served basis. So we're only looking to work with entrepreneurs who are committed to taking action, don't make excuses, and really want to see their vision materialize. So if you'd like to learn how we've helped people go from $20,000 a month to over $200,000 a month in take-home profit, and how we've helped dozens of entrepreneurs around the world do the exact same thing, well, now you can find out. All you gotta do to apply is click the link in the description below, answer a couple questions to book a call with us in the next day or two to chat, and we'll see if we're a great fit to work together. Thanks so much for watching, and now let's get back to the show.
And then when you make that shift, you later found your passion for health. And you know, fast forward a couple of years, I know you're working on Blueprint, which is incredible. Can you give the audience a little bit of context as to what your mission is with Blueprint? Because I know you spend somewhere in the ballpark of over $2 million a year on your health between almost 24 doctors. I know you're on a 2,000, just under, I think it's 1,977 calories per day. You've got supplements, you've got a certain amount of vegetables you eat every day. You're on this profound health kick. And even just seeing you here, your skin looks phenomenally healthy. Your energy looks, you know, through the roof. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, what your mission is with Blueprint and why you decided to turn yourself into a human guinea pig for health for people around the world.
Yeah, a funny side note, we had a YouTube health fitness person come and hang out Monday. And it was funny, he said, you just annihilated, he's 28, he said, you annihilated me in the gym.
Was that Kyle?
I don't think I should probably say who it is.
Oh, okay, no worries.
And he said, you have the energy of a young puppy. I feel like I'm a grandpa with you. But it was funny just to have some comparison data. But yeah, Blueprint is basically, okay, so it is health and wellness. It is anti-aging. I would summarize it like this. We've built an algorithm that takes better care of me than I can myself. Now, if we say, all right, let's take that idea and look at the characteristics of the idea. Let's just say, when the first telegraph message was sent, it was probably apparent for many then, it was inevitable the telegraph would become the dominant medium of communication. When the first email was sent on the internet, when the first antibiotic was given to address something, some things that happen in the world have the characteristics that make them non-negotiable in pushing through humanity to change the course of humanity. Some things that happen are throttled by human opinion. So something may happen and people may say, I hate it, or like I don't prefer it, or no. So on this question with Blueprint, it's important to try to distinguish what kind of accomplishment is this? Is it one that's inevitable? Like once I prove that an algorithm takes better care of me than I can myself, does that just paint the inevitability that just like we use digital navigation systems to use in our, to go in our cars, and we use washing machines instead of washing our clothes down at the creek, is this the inevitability of the future being human? Or do humans feel like this is a situation where we can fight against it with opinion, like, I prefer this or I prefer that? That's what I think the real value of Braintree or Blueprint is trying to understand what kind of idea this is and what just happened.
And you guys do this by actually measuring based on data, right? And I believe I believe you mentioned when you interviewed 74 organs in the human body. Is that correct?
Yeah, male and female. It depends on how you count.
take,
And male, yeah. So I should probably explain context. Yes.
Yeah.
So Blueprint is basically there's a lot of noise today about health and wellness. Like, pick your guru. It's a lot like religion. So just like the Bible supports over 100 different denominations that claim they're God's one and true, everyone feels confused about what to do because everyone tells a different story. And so what I was trying to do with Blueprint to say, okay, we're going to do away with human opinion. We don't care what anyone says.
Okay.
We're going to measure my body with every modality that's available: MRI, ultrasound, biofluids, fitness tests, DNA methylation. If we can measure it, we're going to do it. So I've since become, I'm the most measured person in human history. So my body has spoken with all this data. We take the data, we look at scientific evidence, we say, what does the evidence say is the best thing for my body to do? We then design a clinical grade protocols, and then my job is to follow it with absolute perfection. No questions asked.
And so how does that look? How does that manifest in the form of diet, sleep, all that? It takes your opinion, essentially, for lack of a better expression, you're taking your opinion out of it and plugging it into a GPS and saying, okay, if this is the most optimal path, I'm going to walk it no matter how I feel, no matter what my cravings are.
Exactly.
These sort of opinion-based sort of things, take out of it, and we'll let the data do the decisions.
Exactly right. Really well said. And so right now, I'm penning a pamphlet based upon Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet in early American Revolutionary history. He said, the British monarchy is corrupt and not a good thing for us. We should really do democracy in the United States of America. And his pamphlet went viral. It was the most widely read pamphlet in early American Revolutionary history. And the Constitution the Declaration of Independence was written shortly afterwards. I'm arguing that our mind is the monarch. We live under the tyranny of our mind. What we want, when we want it, and that it does whatever it wants, whenever it wants. And the rest of the constituent members, the organs, the kidney, the liver, the lungs, the pancreas, the prostate, they don't get to express opinions. And what I'm arguing for is a revolution of the human race that rebels against the corrupt monarchy. That we are self-destruction machines. So we are helpless and powerless to stop our own self-destructive behavior. Individually, and how we collectively act with planet Earth. And so it's basically trying to, if you map again the 25th century thought process and say they're talking amongst themselves, they're thinking about the early 21st century, what did we do in the early 21st century that changed the course of human history? And I would hypothesize it's when humans said, we're no longer going to let our minds be the unquestioned source of authority on what we do as a species. We're going to empower other parts of self, in this case, my organs, that speak with data, and then a system is built based upon that.
I love that, because I think the mass population of people out there, when they think of health, they think of it in very arbitrary terms based on who they follow, who they like, or whatever on social media. It's based on arbitrary, like, oh, their body looks good. So this is their fitness program? Cool. Oh, we need this amount of protein? Cool. Let me load up on chicken. Right? It's based on these sort of shallow principles, for lack of a better expression. Although I think there's a lot of good intent out there in the health and wellness industry. But like you said, one person says you need 8 hours of sleep. Someone else says, oh, you only need 3 or 4.
That's right.
One person says the vegan diet. One person says the carnivore diet, right? And everyone's just as positive. Everyone has data. And so to the average person, they go, oh, this is overwhelming. Let me just do what I do better, what's comfortable, or what I feel like. And so what you're proposing with Blueprint is essentially a data-based system where you're leading by example on the forefront, measuring it to show people like, hey, if the organs can speak instead of our will, let's see how that goes. And I think what's fascinating about what you're doing, I believe you have so I know you have we all have biological ages and then chronological ages. And I believe what's your chronological age?
45.
And then your biological age is what?
I'm hundreds of different ages. Like my diaphragm is 18. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it just kind of gets...
exactly. My left ear is 64. So hundreds of different ages.
Can you explain the difference and I guess the value in distinguishing the difference for people maybe listening to that? Because I've studied a lot of your stuff, but for a lot of people who may not have heard of it, what's the difference and why is that important for people to at least take conscious inventory of?
Yeah. So you can look at a heart. Mm-hmm. You don't even need to know the person's chronological age. Mm-hmm. And you can say, does this heart look like and function like a 10-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, mm-hmm. so on. And a heart has very predictable aging patterns in the way it functions, the way it looks. Mm-hmm. And the same is true with our entire body. You wouldn't mistake an 80-year-old heart with a 20-year-old heart. Mm-hmm. They look very different, they function very differently. And so there's enough data on our organs, you can say, what does this look like, what does it function like, and you can age it. Mm-hmm. And so that's true with my hearing, like my left ear is 64, my diaphragm strength is 18.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you can make those distinguish those differences.
So you're hundreds of ages. Your brain's different ages, your eyesight's like my heart is aged in 12 different characteristics.
Yeah, and it's based on the things you do to it and the things you consume. So talk to me a little bit about your day-to-day routine, because I know you have a pretty disciplined day-to-day routine. Walk us through what the most measured man in history's average day is like.
Yeah. Every morning I do a 4-hour routine. So mm-hmm. every day starts the night before. So at 8:30 sharp, everyone in the family stops what they're doing and we run to bed. We run to bed and we're smiling at each other, but we're also being serious, saying we respect sleep mm-hmm. and we're going to get sleep because we want to be our best selves with each other. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to be around ornery, grumpy people. Mm-hmm. So we go to bed exactly at 8:30. We have a wonderful night's sleep.
Wow.
And the next morning we're ready to go. So I wake up and then...
what time do you wake up?
Around 4:35, mm-hmm. I wake up naturally.
Okay.
And I'll just tick through a whole bunch of stuff just to give you an idea. Mm-hmm. So I wake up, I jump out of bed. Mm-hmm. I don't sit there in bed, I don't look at my phone, I don't try to get another 10 minutes. I jump out of bed, I'll measure my body temperature with my inner ear device. Mm-hmm. I'll take 5 pills. Currently I'm looking at trying to increase my ferritin. Mm-hmm. I'll turn on 10,000 lux device to get light exposure that emulates the sun. Mm-hmm. I'll then shower quickly, then come downstairs. I'll drink what I have the Green Giant, which is a concoction of certain things. I'll take 60 or so pills. I'll work
60 pills?
60 or so, yep.
So you just, like 5 at a time?
Probably 15 or 20 at a time.
So you've gotten good at this.
I'm good at it.
And what's in the green drink, if you will? Just
it's collagen peptides, cinnamon, creatine, amino acids.
Yeah.
And then, take the pills. And then I also put a laser cap on my head for hair growth. Mm-hmm. I do HRV therapy, heart rate variability therapy. I'll put this little thing in my ear. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to stack these things as much as possible. Mm-hmm. I'll work out for an hour, come back in, eat a couple pounds of vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, black lentils, ginger, garlic. And
what type of workout? Sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious. What type of workouts have you found in your research are most effective for you and what you're doing? What's like your 1 hour workout?
It's roughly an hour, and I try to flex and stretch every muscle in my body. Mm. And so it's a combination of cardio and weightlifting and stretches, and it's my favorite part. Like I have a lot of favorites, but I just love that 1 hour in the gym every single day. I have it. It's in my garage, and my body just feels amazing, flexible, and
supple, strong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when I don't do it, because if I'm traveling or something, I do feel like my mind is as open as my body is flexible.
I love that. It's powerful. And then you said after your workout, you eat a bunch of vegetables?
Yeah, so it's called super veggie. It's broccoli, cauliflower, ginger, garlic, black lentils, a tablespoon of olive oil, a tablespoon of 100% dark chocolate.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, my next meal, and then I'm finished eating by noon. So any given day, I'm doing, about 100 different scientifically backed interventions in any given day. Mm-hmm. And I just put it in a routine process so that I don't have to think about it. Mm-hmm. And yep.
And so what do you say to people who say, well, well, Bryan, where's the enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
Because I know on social media you're known, and for people who don't follow you on social media, I highly encourage them to check you out on YouTube, Instagram, all your platforms. But you talk about this concept of evening Bryan,
Yeah.
which is the sort of alter ego, for lack of a better expression, of the evening us that we all might have who overindulges, overeats, affects sleep. Talk to me about like how important is it for people out there listening to get conscious of the self-destructive behaviors in that. And then if you could zoom in on what you say to people who say, well, Bryan, where's the fun in that?
Yeah.
Where's the pizza? Where's the donuts? Where's your enjoyment of life? When do you let loose or have your cheat meal? What do you say to that rationale that a lot of people have?
Yeah. Well, if just for a sanity check, if anyone listening to this, just go through this list with me. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the past week, how many times have you eaten more food than you should have? Eaten the wrong kind of food, missed your bedtime, stayed up too late.
I'm guilty of all of those, by the way.
Drank, right? Either a little bit or excessively, smoked, watched porn, spent too much time on social media, on infinite scroll. I'll just stop there. Maybe you're out of fingers or maybe you're out of toes, but how many of those things have you done in the past week? That gives you a rough score of your self-destructive index. So this is a really hard thing for our minds to understand, because we are desperate to protect these behaviors because there are soothing mechanisms for life. And so people are, it's easy to get very defensive about these things, but if you just look at it rationally and you say, I'm doing these things on a routine basis that accelerate my aging, my decay, and my death. I'm doing things that expedite my death. Now, you can come up with all the stories you want, like it's why I'm happy, it's what I choose to do,
Tastes
fine,
good,
whatever you want to say. We just need to, like, as a starting point, say we are engaged in a prolific amount of self-destructive behaviors, individually and as a society. And it's not like we can be like, oh, shoot, you're right, we're going to stop it. Do you really think you can stop those things? And I'd say, if we're all honest, right, it's almost impossible. And so this is the situation I'm really trying to get at with, like, what is the revolution in the early 21st century? We've normalized self-destructive behavior so much that we can do it out in the open and everyone's comfortable with it, and we can do it and we can protect it. So if somebody doesn't do it, we're going to penalize them for being weird.
They're the outcasts.
Exactly.
Oh, why don't you drink? Why don't you do this? Or what? You don't want pizza? Let loose a little bit.
Exactly.
So it creates a cultural sort of pressure to adhere to the sorts of.
So not only do we do it, we protect it and we support it, and we say, this is our special little thing we're going to do together because self-destructive behavior, it's like our thing we want to keep.
A question I want to ask you, and I love the mission of it, is although noble and admirable, just to play devil's advocate, it's very tricky to, use the narrative that you propose and that you share and combat that with the realistic Snickers commercial or Sprite commercial. And I'm being overly general, but the reality is that these are the things, not to mention, people say, well, just be honest, people are gonna be like, well, it's easy for you. You sold your company for hundreds of millions of dollars. You could afford to eat healthy, but, I'm struggling here with my job. There's a lot of that narrative.
Sure.
You name the narrative, people have their response.
Yep.
What do you see if it were to, because I think inevitably I agree with you that we're moving towards that with just the amount of research that's coming out, right? The data speaks volumes. But what do you think is the way that it actually catches in society? Is it that, the marketing is going to have to support it? Like we have to make the marketing of health cool, right? I mean, that's a supplementary factor because the data alone, as we see it, doesn't sell it enough. And I'm playing devil's advocate, but I'm curious, what's your plan or what's your vision to sort of combat that with people? How do you make it cool? How do you gamify it for society? Or what do you think needs to happen, I guess, is my question, for it to really catch?
This is why it's important that we characterize what kind of demonstration this is. So, for example, when the first message of the telegraph was sent, when the first email on the internet was sent, when electricity came about, did it matter what human opinion was? Did it matter what anyone said? Like if you're down at the creek and you're washing your clothes, you're like, okay, now we're not going to have our community ritual because we're no longer here, our kids are no longer playing in the water. How are we going to connect with each other? How are we going to share gossip? It doesn't matter. the washing machine is a more efficient device than doing this. And where it can take hold, it just wins by the characteristics it has in society. And so in that scenario, it doesn't matter what opinion. You don't need to make a washing machine cool. It just makes its way through society. You don't need to make a digital navigation system cool. It just gets you to your destination faster. You don't need to make a computer cool. It just does things more economically efficiently and expands your abilities. And this is what I'm saying with Blueprint. If you say, what is the nature of the idea we're talking about here? I'm arguing it's inevitable. It doesn't matter what pretty story you want to talk about. It doesn't matter if you disagree with it. It doesn't matter. It's inevitable. This algorithm manages entropy better than I can myself.
Right.
It's done. And this is the thing is we have to grapple with as a species is this is not something asking for permission to exist. And nor can anyone stop it with their opinion. And I think once people reconcile with what has been demonstrated, because this looks like a health and wellness program, it looks like this and that, and people are putting up their best arguments of like, I prefer to drink and I prefer to do this because that's what living life is. Doesn't matter. The opinions literally don't matter. If you have to put it in the context of history.
Yeah, it's secondary to the data speaking. I love that. So on that note, Bryan, I'm sure you've had a lot of critics and a lot of fans too, like people who are delving into the research, a lot of the work you're doing. My final question to you is, for people who want to learn more and really start taking those first couple steps to really maximize their health, to get into better shape, both internally and externally, what would be your best advice on some maybe steps 1, 2, 3 that people could do practically to really get the ball rolling, to start really taking control of their health, whether it's better sleep, measuring, actually getting data. Like for people who are watching this clueless, like, oh, what's step 1, 2, 3? Based on the millions of dollars you've spent being the most measured man in history, what would your practical advice be to people with that question?
I'd say 3 things. Before I say 3 things, the philosophical grounding for this thing. So what I think is interesting for us to all think about is if you and I do a thought exercise and we say, what is technology going to be like in 20 years? You and I are not going to even question whether it's going to be better. We just assume it's going to be better. We may debate on, is AGI going to be here? How fast are the computers going to be? What's the size? Are they going to be inside of us instead of outside of our eyes? Like we're going to debate these things, but we're never going to question whether it's going to be better. Now, if you and I say, what are you and I going to be like in 20 years? Without question, you and I assume aged, decayed, and declined. We don't even question it. We don't think we're on some kind of upward trend. Right? We're just trying to slow the inevitable decay. What if we change that? What if you and I had the discussion, what is possible for you and me and for all of society? What if we could say with confidence, like a straight face and say, I don't know what kind of superhero, but like I'm kind of thinking this. What if we were able to, as humans, attach ourselves to the improvement rates of technology and science? And that's what I've tried to do with Blueprint, is I've tried to say my body is in the closed loop improvement system of science and technology, and it's improving as fast as that system allows it to, that I'm not going to engage in the self-destructive behavior. That, I think, is what the people in the 25th century say we figured out. Humanity figured out how to attach their own rates of improvement to be on par with technology, instead of us being martyrs for our technology and letting it live on, but us dying. So I'd say with that context of, can we imagine ourselves having that kind of aspiration about our future? I'd say 3 simple things. Sleep, like make it the #1 priority in your life. We all know this, a good night's sleep, the difference between hope and despair is a good night's sleep. We all know it. Go to bed at the same time every night, don't drink, have enough time before eating your last meal and going to bed, but master a good night's sleep and get it every single night. 2 is try to eat good foods instead of bad foods. 3, exercise. And then to top it all off, fire the worst version of yourself. So identify who does the most self-destructive behavior. For me, it's Evening Bryan, who ate too much food, but identify it. But the point is, even though I've spent all this money developing this protocol, and I do a bunch of stuff, it doesn't need to be complicated. A person can do this in the United States for $1,500 a month. I've made it all open source. It's all free for everybody. But just getting the basics right of getting good sleep, exercising, and eating some decent foods, it gets you off to a really powerful start.
I love it. Bryan, thank you so much for being on the show today. And for those of you guys listening, make sure to check out Bryan and everything he's up to with Blueprint in the link in the description down below, as well as follow him on social media Till next time, live strong, live healthy, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.